Canada.
Table of Contents, Canada.
All about Canada. With visiting and touring information, geography, history, attractions, and other points of interest.
Dr. Sydney Soclof. drsydney22@gmail.com. 2022. Narration by Dr. Sydney Soclof.
Zoe Phonemes.
And Nathan Koltov. For a more complete discussion of YouTube navigation, please go to this video using the link here. Chapter 1. Canada. Canada occupies most of northern North America, extending from the Atlantic Ocean in the east to the Pacific Ocean in the west and northward into the Arctic Ocean. Canada has 10 provinces and 3 territories. The 3 territories are the sparsely populated and frigid regions of the far north, Nunavut, Northwest Territories and Yukon. Canada is the second largest country in the world after Russia by total area and shares the world's longest common border with the United States to the south and northwest.
Areas of the regions of Canada. Quebec is the second largest province in area after Ontario.
Chapter 2. The population of provinces and cities.
Here is the population of the provinces of Canada, going east to west. The total population of Canada is 38 million.
The total population of Canada is 38 million, about the same as the state of California.
This chart shows the relative population of Canada's 10 provinces and 3 territories. We note that the 3 territories each account for only 0.1% of the total population of Canada.
Ontario is the most populous province, with a population of 14.8 million.
Quebec is the second province in population with 8.6 million people, although it is the largest province in area. British Columbia on the west coast is in third place with 5.2 million.
Toronto in Ontario is the largest city in Canada, with a metropolitan area population of 6.2 million. Montreal in Quebec is in second place, with a metropolitan area population of 4.3 million. Vancouver, British Columbia, on the west coast, is the third largest city with a metropolitan area population of 2.6 million.
Quebec City is the 7th largest city in Canada and the second largest in the province of Quebec after Montreal, and has a metropolitan area population of 839,000. The population of Canada is estimated at 38 million in 2022. This is a graph showing the rapid growth of the population of Canada from 1961 to 2003. Most of Canada's population lives within 100 miles of the U.S. border. Much of the population is close to Lakes Erie in Ontario and the St. Lawrence River, between Windsor, Ontario, across from Detroit up to Quebec City.
This is a population density comparison for Canada.
This compares immigration and emigration in Canada from the 1850s to the 1950s.
Chapter 3. Languages in Canada.
Anglophone is the population with English as its mother tongue. Francophone is the population with French as their mother tongue. And allophone is the population with the non-official language as its mother tongue. English and French are official languages in Canada. 9 out of 10 people speak English or French.
The 2001 census showed that 22% of the population spoke French at home.
The proportion of the population that spoke English at home, 67.5%, was appreciably higher than the proportion whose mother tongue was English, 59%.
This is due to the attraction of English to members of other language groups, and is the case even in Quebec, where Anglophones represent a minority.
This is the population by language group in Canada.
Chinese is Canada's third most common mother tongue, accounting for 3% of the total population of Canada.
Italian is in 4th place, and German is in 5th place. Punjabi has moved to 6th place, and Spanish is now down to 7th. Language groups from European countries still made up most of the allophone population. However, the population of these groups is much older, and therefore, their numbers continue to decline.
Allophone groups from Asian and Middle Eastern countries have had the largest increases in numbers.
This shows the languages by province. Quebec is the only province with a francophone majority. Only about 6% of the population in Quebec is Anglophone.
About 80% of Quebec is francophone. Chapter 4. The History of Canada. The land occupied by Canada was inhabited for millennia by various groups of Aboriginal people. Europeans first arrived when the Vikings settled briefly at L'Anse Meadows around 1000 AD. Following the failure of the Viking colony at L'Anse Meadows in present-day Newfoundland, there was no further attempt at North American exploration.
Until 1497, when John Cabot explored Canada's Atlantic coast for England, followed by Jacques Cartier in 1534 for France. Cartier claimed the St. Lawrence Valley for France.
French explorer Samuel de Champlain arrived in 1603 and established the first permanent European settlements at Port Royal in 1605 and Quebec City in 1608. Among French colonists of New France, Canadians extensively settled the St. Lawrence River Valley, and Acadians settled the present-day Maritimes. In contrast, French fur traders and Catholic missionaries explored the Great Lakes, Hudson Bay, and the Mississippi watershed to Louisiana.
The French explorers and fur traders were the first explorers in 35 of the present 50 states and left behind 4,000 place names ranging from Detroit and Duluth in the north to St. Louis and New Orleans in the south.
The English established fishing outposts in Newfoundland around 1610 and colonized the 13 colonies to the south. This is New France circa 1750 with provinces marked in shades of green. Pastel green, Lower Louisiana. Light green, Upper Louisiana. Luminous green, Upper Country of Louisiana. Olive, Acadia. Dark green, Canada.
This is a map of New France at its apogee about 1750.
Chapter 5. French and Indian War, 7 Years' War, 1756 to 1763.
The expanding French and British colonies were contending for control of the western, or interior territories.
Whenever the European countries went to war, there were actions within and by these colonies. However, the dates of the conflicts did not necessarily precisely coincide with those of the larger conflicts.
The French and Indian Wars is a name used in the United States for a series of conflicts in North America that represented the actions that accompanied the European dynastic wars.
In Quebec, the wars are generally referred to as the intercolonial wars, while some conflicts involved Spanish and Dutch forces. All pitted Great Britain, its colonies, and American Indian allies on one side and France, its colonies and Indian allies on the other.
A series of several intercolonial wars erupted between 1689 and 1763.
The first three French and Indian wars followed the same basic pattern. They all started in Europe and then moved to America.
Once the fighting came to America, it was conducted mainly by colonial militias. The final conflict broke this pattern by beginning in North America.
Larger numbers of British regular troops were used alongside the militia, and almost all French territory seized by the British was not returned.
The British victory in the French and Indian Wars reduced France's once vast New World empire to a few West Indian islands, French Guiana, and St. Pierre and Miquelon, a small island fishing colony off Newfoundland.
The Treaty of Paris, 1763, ended the French and Indian War, 7 Years' War, and ceded Canada and most of New France to Britain.
As these wars proceeded, the military advantage moved inexorably towards the British side. This was primarily a reflection of the greater population and productive capacity of the British colonies,
compared with those of France, combined with the greater ability of the British to resupply their colonies and project military power by sea. The French largely offset this in the first three conflicts by mobilizing Native American allies more effectively, but were finally overwhelmed in the Fourth War.
The naming of conflicts after the British monarch of the day is not used by Canadians, who merely employ the name of the larger European conflict, for example, the War of the Grand Alliance rather than King William's War, or refer to them as the intercolonial wars.
Quebec City was the site of the Battle of the Plains of Abraham during the French and Indian War, 7 Years' War.
British troops under General James Wolfe defeated French General Louis-Joseph de Montcalm and took the city. Quebec City was captured by the British in 1759 and held until 1763. The Battle of the Plains of Abraham, also known as the Battle of Quebec, was pivotal in the 7 Years' War, referred to as the French and Indian War in the United States.
The Battle of the Plains of Abraham began on September 12, 1759, and was fought between the forces of the Army and Navy of the British and the French Army. It took place on a plateau just outside the walls of Quebec City.
The battle involved fewer than 10,000 troops between both sides, but proved to be a deciding moment in the conflict between France and Britain over New France's fate, and influenced Canada's later creation.
The battle lasted less than an hour after a 3-month siege by the British. British troops commanded by General James Wolfe successfully resisted the column advance of French troops and Canadian militia under Louis-Joseph, Marquis de Montcalm. Both generals were mortally wounded during the battle. Wolfe died on the field,
and Montcalm passed away the next morning. In the wake of the battle, France's remaining military force in Canada and the rest of North America came under increasing pressure from British forces.
Within 4 years, nearly all of France's vast possessions in eastern North America would be ceded to Great Britain.
France ceded New France to Britain in 1763. All that would remain are the tiny islands of St. Pierre and Miquelon that are just below the south coast of Newfoundland.
St. Pierre and Miquelon are a group of 8 small islands about 10 miles, 16 kilometers, southwest of Newfoundland's Burin Peninsula.
General James Wolfe, 1727–1759, was a British Army officer known for his training reforms, but remembered chiefly for his victory over the French in Canada and establishing British rule there. Because of this, he has been regarded as a hero by many Canadians.
Louis-Joseph de Montcalm, Gauzon, Marquis de Saint-Véran, 1712–1759, was the commander of the French forces in North America during the 7 Years' War, the North American phase of which is called the French and Indian War in the U.S. Montcalm is most remembered for his role in the fall of Quebec and remains a controversial figure.
Following the battle, Major General Isaac Brockforth fortified Quebec City by strengthening the walls
and building an elevated artillery battery known as the Citadel of Quebec before the War of 1812. Chapter 5. The Royal Proclamation of 1763.
Ironically, the overwhelming victory of the British played a role in the eventual loss of their American colonies.
Without the threat of French invasion, the American colonies saw little need for British military protection. They resented British limits on the colonization of the new French territories, as stated in the Proclamation of 1763. These pressures contributed to the American Revolutionary War. The Royal Proclamation of 1763 was by King George III following Great Britain's acquisition of French territory in North America after the French and Indian War, 7 Years' War, ended.
The proclamation aimed to organize Great Britain's new North American empire and stabilize relations with native North Americans through regulation of trade, settlement, and land purchases on the western frontier.
The Royal Proclamation ceased to be law in the United States following the American Revolution, but it continues to be of legal importance to First Nations in Canada. The Royal Proclamation, 1763, carved the province of Quebec out of New France and annexed Cape Breton Island to Nova Scotia.
The Royal Proclamation, 1763, also restricted the language and religious rights of French Canadians.
In 1769, St. John's Island, now Prince Edward Island, became a separate colony.
To avert conflicts in Quebec, the Quebec Act of 1774 expanded Quebec's territory to the Great Lakes and Ohio Valley, and re-established the French language, Catholic faith, and civil law in Quebec. It angered many residents of the 13 colonies, helping to fuel the American Revolution. The Treaty of Paris, 1783, recognized American independence and ceded territories south of the Great Lakes to the United States. Approximately 50,000 United Empire Loyalists fled the United States to Canada.
To accommodate English-speaking Loyalists in Quebec, the Constitutional Act of 1791 divided the province into French-speaking Lower Canada and English-speaking Upper Canada, granting each their own elected legislative assembly.
New Brunswick was split from Nova Scotia to reorganize Loyalist settlements in the Maritime Provinces.
The government of the province of Quebec was changed to accommodate the many English-speaking settlers, known as the United Empire Loyalists. They had arrived from the United States following the American Revolution.
The names Upper and Lower Canada were given according to their location on the St. Lawrence River. as opposed to geographical location.
Upper Canada received English law and institutions, while Lower Canada retained French law and institutions, including seigneury and tenure and the privileges accorded to the Roman Catholic Church. Canada, Upper and Lower, was the central front in the War of 1812 between the United States and the British Empire. The defense of Canada contributed to a sense of unity among British North Americans.
Large-scale immigration to Canada began in 1815 from Britain and Ireland. The timber industry surpassed the fur trade in importance in the early 19th century.
Chapter 6. The United Province of Canada.
The Act of Union of 1840 merged the Canadas into a United Province of Canada. French and English Canadians worked together in the Assembly to reinstate French rights.
A responsible government was established for all British North American provinces by 1849. Chapter 7. The Oregon Treaty of 1846.
The signing of the Oregon Treaty by Britain and the United States in 1846 ended the Oregon boundary dispute,
extending the border westward along the 49th parallel and paving the way for British colonies on Vancouver Island, 1849, and British Columbia, 1858. Canada launched a series of Western exploratory expeditions to claim Rupert's Land and the Arctic region.
The Canadian population grew rapidly because of high birth rates. British immigration was offset by emigration to the United States, especially by French Canadians moving to New England.
Chapter 9. Canada Confederation, 1867.
Following several constitutional conferences, the Constitution Act of 1867 brought about Confederation, creating one Dominion under the name of Canada.
On July 1, 1867, with 4 provinces, Ontario, Québec, Nova Scotia and New Brunswick.
The name Canada has been in use since the earliest European settlement in Canada, with the name originating from Canada, a St. Lawrence Iroquois word, Kanata, meaning village or settlement.
Upon Confederation in 1867, the name Canada was officially adopted for the new Dominion, commonly referred to as the Dominion of Canada until after World War II.
This is an animated map showing the growth and change of Canada's provinces and territories since Confederation. British Columbia and Vancouver Island, which had united in 1866, joined the Confederation in 1871, and the colony of Prince Edward Island joined in 1873. To open the West, the government sponsored construction of 3 transcontinental railways, most notably the Canadian Pacific Railway, opened the prairies to settlement with the Dominion Lands Act,
and established the Northwest Mounted Police to assert its authority over this territory.
In 1898, after the Klondike Gold Rush in the Northwest Territories, the Canadian government created Yukon Territory.
Under Prime Minister Wilfrid Laurier, continental European immigrants settled the prairies, and Alberta and Saskatchewan became provinces in 1905.
Canada automatically entered World War I in 1914 with Britain's declaration of war, sending volunteers to the Western Front, who later became part of the Canadian Corps. The Corps played a substantial role in the Battle of Vimy Ridge and other major battles of the war.
Chapter 10. The Independence of Canada in 1931. The Statute of Westminster affirmed Canada's independence,
Chapter 11. Canada in World War II. Canada declared war on Germany independently during World War II under Prime Minister William Lee Mackenzie King. 3 days after Britain.
The first Canadian Army units arrived in Britain in December 1939. Canadian troops played important roles in the Battle of the Atlantic, the failed 1942 Dieppe raid in France, the Allied invasion of Italy, the D-Day landings, the Battle of Normandy, and the Battle of the Scheldt in 1944.
The Netherlands credits Canada for providing asylum and protection for its monarchy during the war after the country was occupied. The Netherlands also is grateful to Canada for its leadership and a major contribution to the liberation of the Netherlands from Nazi Germany.
Canada has a parliamentary government with strong democratic traditions. Parliament comprises the Crown, an elected House of Commons, and an appointed Senate.
Chapter 12. Canadian money.
Currency exchange rates can change daily. For the latest exchange rate, click on this icon. $1 equals 1 Canadian dollar and 29 cents. 1 Canadian dollar equals $0.77.
These are $10 and $20 Canadian banknotes. These are $50 and $100 Canadian banknotes.
Chapter 13. The Province of Newfoundland and Labrador.
Newfoundland and Labrador is a province of Canada composed of the island of Newfoundland and a larger mainland sector, Labrador, to the northwest.
Newfoundland and Labrador is the most easterly part of North America. The position of Newfoundland and Labrador on the Atlantic coast gives it strategic importance in transportation and communications.
This is the Newfoundland and Labrador Confederation building. Chapter 14. Prince Edward Island.
Prince Edward Island, PEI, in French, Île de Prince Édouard, is one of Canada's 13 provinces and territories. It is one of the 3 maritime provinces and 4 Atlantic provinces.
Prince Edward Island, PEI, is the smallest province in land area and population, with only 160,000 people. But it is the most densely populated.
The Confederation Bridge, in French, Pont de la Confédération, links Prince Edward Island to New Brunswick on the mainland.
The Confederation Bridge carries the Trans-Canada Highway across the Northumberland Strait. It was opened in 1997, and at 12.9 kilometers, 8.0 miles, the bridge is Canada's longest bridge. The island has several nicknames: Garden of the Gulf, Birthplace of Confederation, and Cradle of Confederation. Its capital and largest city is Charlottetown.
This is the Prince Edward Island Province House.
Chapter 15. Nova Scotia. Canada's maritime provinces are Newfoundland and Labrador, New Brunswick, Prince Edward Island, and Nova Scotia. Here is Nova Scotia. Nova Scotia is Canada's second smallest province in area after Prince Edward Island.
Halifax is the capital and largest city of Nova Scotia and Canada's largest ice-free Atlantic seaport.
Halifax in Nova Scotia is the 12th largest city in Canada, with a population of 466,000.
This is the Nova Scotia Province House.
Chapter 16. New Brunswick.
Here again, are Canada's maritime provinces of Newfoundland and Labrador, New Brunswick, Prince Edward Island and Nova Scotia. This is a map of New Brunswick. The population of New Brunswick is 794,000. The provincial capital is Fredericton, with a population of only 58,000. St. John is the most populous city, with 71,000.
This is the New Brunswick Legislative Building.
Chapter 17. The Province of Quebec.
This is the flag of Quebec.
Quebec is the only Canadian province with a predominantly French-speaking population, and the only one whose sole official language is French at the provincial level.
The province of Quebec is 3 times the size of France.
Quebec was the heart of a vast colonial empire of New France, stretching from the Atlantic Ocean to Louisiana on the Gulf of Mexico.
The 2 biggest cities in Quebec are Montreal and Quebec City.
This shows the province of Quebec in bordering regions.
Quebec is bordered to the west by the province of Ontario, James Bay, and Hudson Bay.
Quebec is bordered on the north by the Hudson Bay and Strait, and the Uingadal Bay.
Quebec is bordered to the east by the Gulf of St. Lawrence in the provinces of Newfoundland and Labrador, and New Brunswick. Quebec is bordered on the south by the U.S. states of Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont, and New York.
This shows Montreal and Quebec City in Quebec.
Je me souviens is the official motto of Quebec. The motto means, in English, I remember.
Je me souviens, I remember, was first carved under the coat of arms of Quebec's Parliament building facade in 1883. It is an official part of the coat of arms, and has been the official license plate motto since 1978.
When it replaced La Belle Province, the beautiful province.
The expression La Belle Province is still used chiefly in tourism as a nickname for the province. Quebec is the second most populous province after Ontario. Most inhabitants live in urban areas near the St. Lawrence River between Montreal and Quebec City, the capital. The Nord du Québec region, occupying the northern half of the province, is sparsely populated and inhabited primarily by Aboriginal peoples.
English-speaking communities and English-language institutions are concentrated in the west of the island of Montreal. Still, they are also significantly present in the Ottawa, the Eastern Townships, and Gaspé regions. Nationalism plays a prominent role in the politics of Quebec, and all 3 major provincial political parties have sought greater autonomy for Quebec in recognition of its unique status. Sovereigntist governments held referendums on independence in 1980 and 1995.
In 2006, the Canadian House of Commons passed a symbolic motion recognizing the Québécois as a nation within a united Canada. While Quebec's substantial natural resources have long been the mainstay of its economy, sectors of the knowledge economy such as aerospace, information and communication technologies, biotechnology, and the pharmaceutical industry also play leading roles.
These many industries have all contributed to helping Quebec become the second most economically influential province, second only to Ontario.
Hydro-Québec is a government-owned public utility established in 1944 by the Government of Quebec. The company is in charge of generating, transmitting, and distributing electricity across Quebec and the northeastern United States. Its head office is in Montreal.
With 59 hydroelectric and 1 nuclear generating station, Hydro-Québec is the largest electricity generator in Canada and the world's largest hydroelectric generating company. The combined capacity of its power stations was 36,429 megawatts in 2008. This is the Quebec Parliament building. Chapter 18. The Province of Ontario.
This shows Canada's 13 provinces and territories, with Ontario near the center between Quebec and Manitoba.
Ontario borders the U.S. states Michigan, New York, Minnesota, and the Canadian provinces Manitoba, Nunavut, and Quebec.
Ontario is the only province that borders the Great Lakes. It touches 4 of the 5 lakes, with Lake Michigan being entirely with the U.S. This is a relief map of Ontario. Most of Ontario is relatively flat and of moderately low elevation. This is the Ontario Legislative Building. Toronto is the capital city of the province of Ontario and the largest city in Canada.
Toronto is the largest city in Canada, with a metropolitan area population of 6.2 million. Toronto is the largest city in Canada, but ranks only 9th in the population of all cities in North America. Chapter 19. Prairie Provinces.
The Prairie Provinces of Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Alberta.
This is a map of Canada. The 3 Prairie Provinces are from east to west: Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Alberta.
Together with British Columbia, the Prairie Provinces form the Western Provinces. The entire region is known for supporting extensive cattle ranching and dry land farming.
This is a more detailed map of the 3 Prairie Provinces, Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Alberta.
Manitoba.
This is Manitoba. The capital and largest city is Winnipeg, with a population of 750,000. This is the Manitoba Legislative Building. Saskatchewan.
This is Saskatchewan. The largest city is Saskatoon, with a population of 270,000. This is the Saskatchewan Legislative Building.
Alberta. This is Alberta, with a population of 4.5 million. The capital and second largest is Edmonton, with a population of 970,000.
The largest city in Alberta is Calgary, with a population of 1.3 million. This is the Alberta Legislative Building.
Chapter 18. The Canadian Rockies.
Chapter 20. The Canadian Rockies are on the border of Alberta and British Columbia, with Banff and Jasper National Parks. There are also many hot springs resorts, such as Radium Hot Springs. Yoho Glacier and Kootenay National Parks are also in the Canadian Rockies of Alberta and British Columbia.
Jasper and Banff National Parks are in the Canadian Rockies bordering British Columbia and Alberta.
Athabasca Glacier is a large glacier in Banff National Park. Chapter 21. The Province of British Columbia. British Columbia is the westernmost province of Canada.
This is the province of British Columbia. The capital is Victoria, and the largest city is Vancouver.
These are the British Columbia Parliament buildings. Chapter 22. Canadian Territories, Nunavut, Northwest Territories, and Yukon Territory.
This shows the three territories of Canada: Nunavut, Northwest Territories and Yukon Territory. The three territories are the sparsely populated and frigid regions of the far north, Nunavut, Northwest Territories and Yukon Territory. The Yukon Territory is best known for its connection to the Klondike Gold Rush of 1896 to 1899. Gold was discovered in the Klondike region of Yukon on August 16, 1896. It triggered a migration of an estimated 100,000 prospectors to the Klondike between 1896 and 1899.
Most prospectors went by sea up to Skagway in Alaska, then by land to the Yukon River and then by boat to the Klondike. This shows the major routes to the Klondike. One is by sea from Seattle to St. Michael's and then by steamer up the Yukon River. Prospectors with supplies at the Chilkoot Pass.
The Klondike Gold Rush triggered a stampede of prospectors. Some became wealthy, but the majority went in vain. It has been immortalized in films, literature, and photographs.
The license plate of Canada's Northwest Territories is shaped like a polar bear. This is the Northwest Territories Legislative Building. This is the Nunavut Legislative Building. This is the Yukon Territory Legislative Building.
Chapter 23. Interesting facts about Canada.
Canada is the world's second largest country. The largest is Russia, at 17 million square kilometers.
Canada is in second place at almost 10 million square kilometers. And the U.S. is just a little bit smaller in third place at 9.8 million square kilometers.
Canada is the largest country in the Western Hemisphere and borders only one other country, the United States of America.
Canada also has the longest international border in the world. That is between its only neighboring country, the U.S., at 5,525 miles, or 8,892 kilometers.
More than half of all the lakes in the world are in Canada, with more than 3 million lakes. Canada has two of the biggest lakes in the world, Great Bear Lake and Great Slave Lake, both in the Northwest Territories.
One of the longest highways in the world is in Canada. The Trans-Canada Highway goes from the Atlantic at St. John's in Newfoundland to the Pacific Ocean at Victoria, BC. A distance of 4,860 miles, or 7,532 kilometers.
The maple leaf has been a symbol of Canada for a long time. It was initially a symbol used by French Canadians. And in 1834, the first mayor of Montreal said that the maple leaf was the king of our forests, the symbol of the Canadian people.
Canada spans 6 time zones from west to east: Pacific, Mountain, Central, Eastern, Atlantic and Newfoundland.
The Newfoundland time zone, NT, is unique in that it is at UTC-3 hours and 30 minutes, and thus 1/2 of an hour ahead of the Atlantic time zone.
In comparison, Russia spans 11 time zones, or almost halfway around the world. If overseas territories are included, Both the US and France can claim to extend over 11 time zones.
The Trans-Canada Highway is the longest national highway in the world. It passes through all 10 provinces of Canada, from the Pacific Ocean on the west coast to the Atlantic Ocean on the east coast, spanning 7,476 kilometers, 4,645 miles.
Canada is the third most forested country in the world, with about half of its landmass covered by forest. There are approximately 180 tree species in Canada, and timber is one of the country's main exports.
Canada has the longest coastline in the world. All those islands and jagged, irregular lines add up to the longest coastline in the world at over 125,500 miles, or 201,168 kilometers.
The coldest recorded temperature in Canada was -81.4 degrees Fahrenheit, or -63 degrees Celsius in Snag, Yukon. The coldest average temperature in Canada is in Eureka, Nunavut, where the yearly average temperature is -3.5 degrees Fahrenheit, or -19.7 degrees Celsius.
Chapter 24. Canada Population Density.
Most of Canada is virtually uninhabited, making it one of the least densely populated countries in the world.
Canada's population is mostly very close to the U.S. In fact, 90% of Canadians live within 100 miles, 160 kilometers, of the U.S. border.
The 5 least densely populated countries with a population of over 10 million are Australia with 3.32 people per square kilometers, Canada with 4.19 per square kilometers, Kazakhstan with 7.04, the Russian Federation with 8.91, and Bolivia with 10.92 per square kilometers. The most densely populated areas along this border in the east, extending from just east of Detroit to the Maritime Provinces on the coast, and containing the major cities of Toronto, Ottawa and Montreal. The second most densely populated region begins in Winnipeg and extends to the base of the Canadian Rockies. In between these two regions, however, Canada is sparsely populated. This gap in population is due to Canada's most important geographic feature, the Canadian Shield. The Canadian Shield is an area formed mainly of volcanic rock covered with a thin layer of soil and many small lakes. Much of Ontario is covered by the Shield. The Canadian Shield is an immense area, a trackless wilderness that is virtually uninhabited. Much of Ontario is covered by the Shield.
The area of Canada that is most densely populated is located near Canada's main maritime shipping lane, the St. Lawrence Great Lakes Seaway System. This system covers the Great Lakes and the St. Lawrence River leading into the Atlantic Ocean.
Nevertheless, an important feature of Canada's geography is its lack of viable transcontinental water transportation routes.
Aside from the St. Lawrence Great Lakes Seaway System in the east, Canada is relatively isolated from the Mississippi River system, which is the main circulatory system of the U.S.
Canada is the second largest trading partner of the U.S. but has to rely on land-based transport methods.
There are 2 official languages in Canada, English and French.
The French and British weren't the first Europeans to colonize Canada. It was the Vikings under Leif Erikson who led the expedition in around 1000 AD. He was the grandson of a Norwegian Viking who was exiled to Iceland for some killings.
The Viking settlement was in Newfoundland. known to them as Vinland, named for its vines that enabled them to produce grape wine. Apparently, but only lasted a few years.
Leif Erikson, sometimes called Leif the Lucky, is believed by most historians to have been the first explorer to reach the North American mainland. In about the year 1000, Leif Erikson landed at a place he called Vinland. Vinland was identified as Newfoundland in 1963 when archaeologists uncovered the remains of a Viking settlement at the extreme northern tip of Newfoundland.
The Viking settlement was at a place now known as Lonsaw Meadows.
Recommended videos, Canada.
Recommended video, Geography Now. Canada. Recommended video, Canada, Geography. History. Nature and Culture. Recommended video, The Incredible History of Canada in 12 Minutes.
Recommended video, History of Canada. Recommended video, Top 20 Places to Visit in Canada. The Maple Leaf Forever.
Table of Contents, Canada.
Thanks for watching.